"They won't take mine." The cry tore through the 71-seek night, more a roar of defiance than of fear. Senior, 97, felt the ground tremble beneath her feet as 1,000 shadows moved in the blizzard. The leopard's icy eyes reflected an ancestral hunger, but what they didn't know was that the old YAKUT woman harbored a spirit wilder than theirs. And what she was about to do would defy death itself. Xenia was not just a woman. She was the living memory of the land, the song whispered by Yakutia's icy winds. Her eyes, though marked by nearly a century of merciless winters and countless storms, burned with a determination that would make any young warrior pale. Her staff, more an extension of her body than a mere support, planted itself firmly in the compacted snow, its invisible roots anchoring her to the ancestral land as she watched the 1,000 predators. They were many indeed, a dark, hungry tide moving with lethal grace, their slender, muscular bodies almost invisible against the furious white of the blizzard, except for their eyes that glowed like live embers in the biting darkness. Inside the sheepfold, the sheep, sensing the imminent threat that hung in the icy air, huddled together, their bleats muffled by the incessant howl of the wind and the low, guttural growl emanating from the horde of leopards. Xenia felt a pang in her chest, a pain that was not physical but emotional. It wasn't fear for herself, but a deep anguish for the life that depended on her. Those sheep were not just wool and meat. They were the promise of a tomorrow for her people, warmth on the coldest nights, the meal that would ward off hunger from the children's thin faces. The responsibility weighed on her bowed shoulders, but it did not break them. On the contrary, it seemed to infuse her with renewed strength, an ancestral energy that flowed through her veins, a legacy of generations of survivors. She took a deep breath, the icy air burning her lungs and scratching her throat, but she didn't care about the discomfort. Her thin, dry lips moved in a silent prayer, an invocation to the spirits of the tundra, to the ancestors who had taught her to read the signs of ice and wind, to feel the earth beneath her feet. Every fiber of her being was alert, her ears sharp, catching the almost imperceptible crackle of a paw in the snow, the rustle of an ice-covered bush stirred by the predator's movement. She knew that brute force would not be enough against such numbers. Cunning, patience, and the wisdom accumulated in 97 years of life in Yakutia would be her only weapons, sharpened by necessity and experience. One of the leopards, larger and bolder than the others, stepped forward, its eyes fixed on Senior as if assessing her, weighing her apparent fragility against the aura of defiance she emanated. A shiver ran down the old woman's spine, but she did not retreat an inch. Her feet were planted like the oldest trees in the forest, their roots invisible, yet deep and unshakable. She raised her staff slowly, not in a threatening gesture, but as a reference point, an invisible boundary that the predators should not dare to cross. It was a silent warning, a veiled challenge. The village slept, oblivious to the monumental drama unfolding just meters from its warm cabins. Senior imagined the sleeping faces of her grandchildren, of her neighbors, the trust they placed in her. The thought of seeing them suffer hunger squeezed her heart with a searing pain, but it also ignited a silent, resolute fury in her spirit. She was the guardian, the last line of defense against the abyss of hopelessness. And she would not fail, not while there was a breath of life in her body. Her gloved fingers gripped the staff with surprising firmness for her age, the cold wood seeming to pulse with the same determination. The battle would not be fought with claws and teeth, but with the unbreakable will of a matriarch who refused to yield. The wind howled, bringing with it snowflakes that danced around Ksenia's diminutive figure, transforming her into an almost mystical silhouette against the darkness of the night. She waited, watching, calculating every movement of the predators, while the 1,000 hungry eyes stared at her with predatory intensity. With each passing second, The tension mounted. The air grew denser, charged with the promise of an inevitable confrontation, a duel of wills under Yakutia's merciless sky. With each passing second, the tension mounted. The air grew denser, charged with the promise of an inevitable confrontation, a duel of wills under Yakutia's merciless sky. Xenia felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear, but from the biting cold that seemed to penetrate to her bones, a cruel reminder of her age and the fragility of the body that housed such an indomitable spirit. For a fleeting instant, a shadow of doubt crossed her wrinkled face. Could she, a woman of almost 100 years, truly face 1,000 hungry beasts? The image of the leopard's hungry eyes, multiplied in the darkness, seemed to drain the warmth from her heart. But then, like a flash of light in the midst of the blizzard, the vision of her grandchildren's faces, pale and thin from hunger, appeared in her mind, and the doubt dissipated. Replaced by a torrent of fury and determination, she would not fail. With a slow, deliberate movement, Xenia raised her staff above her head, not to strike, but to trace an arc in the icy air. A guttural sound, low and deep, escaped her lips, an ancestral melody that seemed to echo the howls of the wind and the whispers of the earth itself. It was not a threat, but a warning, a declaration that this territory was under her protection. The leopards, accustomed to silent hunting and fleeing prey, hesitated. Their eyes, previously fixed on the soft flesh of the sheep, now turned to the diminutive yet imposing figure of the matriarch. They felt the strength of her presence, an energy that came not from youth or speed, but from ancient wisdom. One of the alpha males, an animal with dark fur and scars from past battles, growled, a sound that vibrated in the icy air, and took a cautious step forward, testing the limits. Xenia, without moving her feet, leaned slightly, her eyes fixed on his. She knew that the first to show weakness would lose. Her lips curved into an almost imperceptible smile, a gesture that to the predators could be interpreted as a challenge or madness. She remembered the stories told by her grandmother about how the elders of Yakutia used mind and spirit to dominate nature, not brute force. It was a delicate dance between respect and dominance. She began to move her staff in slow, rhythmic circles, raising small clouds of snow that danced in the wind, creating a visual and auditory barrier. Her movements were calculated, each swing of the staff a beat in the heart of the tundra, an invocation to the guardian spirits. The sheep, inside the sheepfold, felt the change in the atmosphere, the subtle relief that seeped into the air, and their bleats subsided, though the tension still hung heavy. Xenia concentrated all her energy, all her will, into every movement, every sound. She was not just defending the flock. She was defending the very essence of her community, the hope that life could flourish even in the cruelest winter. A young leopard, impatient and hungry, tried to flank her, moving quickly through the shadows of the blizzard. Xenia, with surprising agility for her age, spun her body, pointing the staff directly at it, not touching it, but blocking its path with instinctive precision. The animal recoiled, surprised by the old woman's speed. She didn't need claws or teeth. Her presence was a weapon in itself. The cold bit at her cheeks and fingers, but she barely felt it. Her mind was clear, focused, every sense sharpened by the urgency of the situation. The 1,000 leopard eyes watched her, confused, their hunting instinct confronted by an invisible yet unbreakable barrier. The hunger was palpable, but Xenia's determination was even stronger, a spiritual wall against wild fury, a silent promise that, as long as she lived, the village's hope would not die. Xenia felt the cold deepen, an icy bite that seemed to whisper of the inevitability of time and age. With each gust of wind, her bones protested, but her mind remained as clear as the winter sky after a blizzard. The 1,000 leopard eyes, once filled with unified hunger, now showed signs of growing confusion. They were predators, accustomed to hunting and fleeing, but Xenia did not flee. She was an unshakable mountain, and her stillness was more unsettling than any roar. She knew that patience was a virtue not only for the hunter, but also for the guardian. Memories of her grandmother, a woman of deep wisdom and eyes that saw beyond the visible, came to her mind. Sound, Xenia, can be a more potent weapon than a spear. It confuses, it disorients, it creates barriers where there are no walls. With this memory as her guide, Xenia took a deep breath, and a low, guttural sound began to vibrate in her chest, an ancestral melody that seemed to be born from the depths of the frozen earth. It was not a war cry, but a chant, a lament that mingled with the howl of the wind, creating a strange and primordial symphony. The leopards, sensitive to every nuance of the environment, tilted their heads, their ears moving, trying to decipher that new sonic threat. The alpha male, who had previously shown such audacity, took a step back, his eyes fixed on the matriarch. Xenia's melody was not aggressive, but it carried an authority that seemed to emanate from the tundra itself. She then, with a slow and precise movement of her staff, began to scrape its tip on the icy surface of the ground. The sharp scratching sound, like the lament of an ice spirit, cut through the air, overlaying her deep chant. The combination was dissonant, disturbing, a cacophony that seemed to disorganize the predator's primal instincts. They looked at each other, uneasy, hunger still present, but now mixed with a palpable hesitation. Inside the sheepfold, the sheep, which had previously bleated in panic, now quieted, their wide eyes watching Xenia's diminutive figure through the cracks in the wood. They felt the change, the decrease in predatory pressure, and a faint hope began to emerge in their small hearts. Xenia, in turn, felt fatigue begin to weigh on her shoulders, age taking its toll on every fiber of her being. The cold seemed to penetrate deeper, but the image of her grandchildren's faces, sleeping in their warm beds, the vision of the village depending on those sheep to survive the winter, was a balm for her soul, an inexhaustible source of strength. A group of younger, more impatient leopards tried a new tactic, splitting up and attempting to flank Xenia from both sides. But the old YAKUT woman, with the wisdom of one who had read nature's signs for almost a century, anticipated their movements. She turned her body slightly, not to confront them directly, but to use her staff as an extension of her presence, pointing it at one flank, while her piercing gaze fixed on the other. It was a silent chess game, where every move was calculated and laden with intent. The leopards, disoriented by her mental agility and the invisible barrier she created, hesitated again. Hunger was a burning fire in their bellies, but Xenia's presence was an even more mysterious and unbreakable force, a spiritual wall against wild fury. Hunger was a burning fire in their bellies, but Xenia's presence was an even more mysterious and unbreakable force, a spiritual wall against wild fury. The matriarch felt the weight of every winter in her bones, a pain that intensified with the penetrating cold, but she did not allow physical weakness to obscure her mind. Her eyes, though tired, swept over the horde of leopards, searching for any sign of a breach, a point of vulnerability that could be exploited. They were restless, their growls lower now, mixed with a murmur of uncertainty that Xenia, with her hearing sharpened by life on the tundra, could discern. Confusion was her newest ally, a gift from the ancestral spirits that seemed to whisper in her ears. With renewed determination, Xenia began to move. It was not a run nor a hurried step, but a slow, deliberate march around the sheepfold, her staff dragging in the snow, leaving a deep trail. With each step, she chanted a new song, this time more melodic, almost a lament, that rose and fell with the howl of the wind. It was a song from her childhood, taught by her mother to calm the wild animals that sometimes came too close to the tents. The melody, imbued with centuries of YAKUT wisdom, seemed to envelop the predators, creating an invisible barrier of sound and intent. The leopards, hypnotized by the strangeness of the scene, watched her, their heads tilted, hunger momentarily eclipsed by curiosity and mystery. The alpha male, the same one as before, tried to regroup his companions with a stronger growl, a call to predatory order. But Xenia's melody was more potent. She intensified her chant, her eyes fixed on the leader, conveying a clear message: this is not your place, this life is protected. Her gestures were broad, yet gentle, as if she were weaving an invisible net around the sheepfold. She used her staff to tap rhythmically on the frozen ground, creating a drumming sound that mingled with the chant, an ancestral percussion that seemed to vibrate directly in the leopards' hearts, awakening in them a caution that surpassed their hunting instinct. Inside the sheepfold, the sheep, feeling the decrease in direct threat, began to calm down. Some dared to raise their heads, their large, dark eyes watching Xenia with a mixture of fear and reverence. They were the heart of the village, and Xenia was their guardian. The thought of her grandchildren, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the imminent danger, spurred her on, warming her spirit. She was not fighting only for herself or for the sheep. She was fighting for the continuity of her lineage, for the hope of her community, in a world where life was a constant battle against cold and hunger. Xenia noticed that the horde began to disperse into smaller groups, the predatory cohesion breaking down under the pressure of her unusual tactic. Some younger leopards, the most impatient, began to move away, their bodies blending into the shadows of the blizzard, seeking easier and less enigmatic prey. The alpha male, however, remained, his eyes still fixed on Xenia, as if in a standoff of wills. He could not understand the strength emanating from that fragile figure, but he could not ignore it. The old YAKUT woman felt a pang of exhaustion, but victory was within reach. She knew she needed to maintain the pressure, not give them a chance to regroup. Her voice, though hoarse, continued to intone the song, a melody of defiance and protection, an echo of the resilience of a people forged in ice and adversity, reaffirming that the YAKUT spirit was, indeed, an inextinguishable flame that transcended death itself. The alpha male, a colossus of muscle and contained fury, did not move. His eyes, like two polished obsidian stones, did not waver from Xenia, a silent duel of wills that seemed to freeze the very air and suspend time. He growled again, a low, vibrating sound that was a warning, a last attempt to intimidate, to break the resilience of that diminutive figure. But Xenia, though feeling the weight of exhaustion in every fiber of her being, did not yield an inch. Her voice, hoarse and almost a whisper now, continued to weave the ancestral melody, a sonic tapestry that seemed to envelop the sheepfold and ward off the darkness, creating a bubble of protection amidst the fury of the blizzard. She knew this was the crucial moment, the tipping point where human determination clashed with wild persistence. If she faltered now, if her voice failed, all would be irretrievably lost. The matriarch felt a sharp pain in her right knee, a cruel reminder of her advanced age and the sleepless nights spent in vigil under Yakutia's merciless sky. Her gloved fingers, already numb from the biting cold, gripped the staff with a strength that seemed to come from somewhere else, from a reserve of energy that transcended the physical, a heritage of generations of survivors. She looked at the alpha male, and in her tired eyes, marked by almost a century of life, he saw not fear, but an inextinguishable flame of love and protection. It was love for her village, for her grandchildren, for every sheep that represented life, hope, and continuity amidst the icy, hungry vastness. This flame was her armor, her unbreakable shield against the fury of the 1,000 predators that surrounded her. The younger leopards, who had dispersed, began to move even further away, their survival instincts calling them away from that enigmatic and inexplicable scene. They did not understand the stubbornness of that old woman, the invisible force that kept her standing against such a numerous and hungry horde. The cold, which was already a constant and relentless enemy, seemed to intensify with each gust of wind, sweeping the snow in whirlwinds that danced around Ksenia, transforming her into an almost legendary figure, a spectral guardian of life under the pale moonlight. Ksenia, with a monumental effort that demanded every drop of her remaining energy, took a step forward, then another, slowly closing the distance between herself and the alpha male. It was not an aggressive advance, but a silent declaration of possession that this ground was sacred and inviolable, protected by an iron will. The staff, which had previously scraped the ground with a scratching sound, was now raised slightly, pointing to the sky, like an antenna that captured the strength of the ancestors and the spirits of the tundra. The melody of her voice grew firmer, a hymn of resistance that seemed to defy winter itself and ancestral hunger. The alpha male, visibly surprised by the old woman's audacity, took a step back, then another, his muscles tense but without his former conviction. His instincts warned him of danger, a danger that was not physical but spiritual, a barrier he could not cross or understand. Inside the sheepfold, the sheep, sensing the change in dynamics, began to move more freely. No longer huddled in panic but with cautious calm, their soft bleats were almost a silent thank you, an acknowledgement of the imminent victory. They trusted Ksenia in her strength and innate wisdom. The matriarch felt this connection, this mutual trust, and it gave her new breath, a warmth in her chest that pushed away the cold. She was not alone. The spirits of the earth, the faith of her community, the hope of her grandchildren, all of it enveloped her, giving her the courage to continue, to persist until the end. The alpha male, after a final growl of frustration, turned slowly, his eyes still fixed on Ksenia for a moment, as if engraving that image in his ancestral memory. Then, with a graceful movement, yet laden with defeat, he moved away, disappearing into the blizzard, followed by the few leopards that still remained, their bodies dissolving into the furious white. The silence that followed was almost deafening, broken only by the howl of the wind and the soft sound of Ksenia's heart beating strongly in her chest. She had won, not with brute force, but with the unbreakable strength of the YAKUT spirit, with the wisdom of a lifetime, and with selfless love for her community. The matriarch, bent with exhaustion but uplifted by triumph, remained there. Her staff, firmly planted in the snow, the guardian of hope amidst the ice. A solitary tear, warm and salty, ran down her wrinkled cheek, not of sadness, but of deep relief and immense gratitude for having been able to protect life. Ksenia remained there, her staff firmly planted in the snow, the guardian of hope. A solitary, warm tear ran down her wrinkled cheek, of relief and gratitude for having protected life. The night's silence, previously tense, was now a fragile peace, broken by the melancholic howl of the wind. Ksenia felt her knees tremble. The weight of her 97 winters caught up with her. The adrenaline that had kept her standing dissipated, leaving overwhelming exhaustion and searing pain in every muscle. Her gloved fingers barely held the staff. The cold, previously ignored, bit with cruel ferocity, penetrating her clothes and settling in her bones. She knew she needed warmth to return to the cabin, to the fireplace, and the safety of her family. With a sigh that seemed to tear her chest, Ksenia made a monumental effort to move. Each step was a battle, every fiber of her being protesting. The staff, her weapon and shield, was now a heavy support. She looked at the sheepfold where the sheep calm huddled together. A fragile smile curved her lips. They were safe. The village was safe. This certainty was her only fuel. She began to walk away, her eyes fixed on the distant lights of the cabins, small points of warmth and life. The distance, once insignificant, now seemed an abyss. The blizzard, less intense, still obscured her vision, and the wind pushed her back with each step, an invisible enemy. Xenia felt dizzy. Her head spun, the world seemed to tilt. Images of her grandchildren, once inspiring, mingled with visions of her youth, of her mother, of her husband, all calling to her. She knew she was in danger, that the cold was winning the battle against her tired body. "Not now," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "Not after all this." She tried to quicken her pace, but her legs refused to obey. The staff slipped from her hands, falling into the snow. Xenia tried to bend down, but her knees gave way, and she fell face down in the icy snow. A sharp pain from the cold shot through her. Her eyes closed, and a welcoming darkness began to envelop her, promising the rest she craved. She fought against the darkness, against the promise of peace. The image of her youngest granddaughter, Anya, with her bright eyes and contagious laugh, flashed in her mind. Anya needed her. The village needed her to survive this cruel winter. Xenia tried to get up, but her arms wouldn't respond, heavy and numb. She was too exhausted, too frozen, feeling every fiber of her being give way. A sense of helplessness, something she rarely felt, overwhelmed her, a heavy burden on her indomitable spirit. Heroism transformed into pure vulnerability. She, the unshakable matriarch, lay there, fallen in the snow, a few meters from the safety of her village, unable to move, caught between life and death. The sun began to rise on the horizon, painting the sky with pale shades of pink and orange. But Xenia did not see it, her vision blurred by exhaustion and cold. Her eyes were fixed on an invisible point, her breath weak and irregular, almost a whisper in the icy air. The cold continued to steal her warmth, relentless, and the darkness threatened to consume her completely, an icy veil over her consciousness. The village still slept, oblivious to the sacrifice and the danger that now hung over its guardian. Inside one of the cabins, little Anya, just 7 years old, woke with a start. A strange dream of her grandmother Xenia dancing with the wind spirits had awakened her. She got out of bed, rubbing her eyes, and walked to the window, curious. The rising sun began to illuminate the landscape, revealing a dark, motionless figure near the sheepfold, a spot that shouldn't be there. Anya blinked, trying to make out the image. It wasn't a rock nor snow. It was a human form, bent, motionless, and something in her chest tightened. A shiver, more intense than the cold from the window, ran down her spine. It was her grandmother, Xenia. Anya didn't think twice. Her heart pounded erratically, a drumbeat of urgency. With trembling hands, she tried to open the heavy wooden door, but her fingers slipped on the icy handle. The image of her grandmother fallen outside became clearer, more desperate. Finally, with a push, the door yielded with a creak. The icy air rushed into the cabin, but Anya barely felt it. Her bare feet touched the cold floor, and she ran to her parents' room, her heart in her throat. "Mama, Papa, Grandma Xenia, she's fallen outside," Anya cried, her voice thin with tears. Her parents, Mikhail and Yelena, woke abruptly, their sleep broken by their daughter. Mikhail, strong and calm, leaped up, his face etched with worry. Yelena, beside her daughter, hugged her, trying to understand the words. "Where, my little one? Where is Grandma?" Yelena asked, her eyes wide with dread. Anya pointed to the window, tears streaming down her face. "Near the sheep. She's not moving." Mikhail waited no longer. He quickly put on his fur coat, pulled on his boots, and grabbed a lantern. Yelena, trembling, did the same, while trying to calm Anya, who was crying. The news spread like wildfire. A neighbor, alerted by the shouts, knocked on the door, and within minutes, a procession of men and women wrapped in furs ran towards the sheepfold. The sun, promising a new day, now seemed to mock the urgency, its pale rays barely warming the air. The snow, once a white blanket, transformed into a battlefield, where every step was a struggle against the relentless cold. They reached the sheepfold. There lay Xenia, a small, fragile figure, almost swallowed by the snow. Her staff lay near her gloved hands, pale and still. Mikhail knelt beside his mother, his heart heavy with pain. "Mother, Xenia," he murmured, his voice choked. He touched her face, cold as winter. Yelena and the others joined him, their faces reflecting the same anguish. The experienced hunter Boris checked Xenia's pulse. "Weak, but it's still there," he exclaimed, a spark of hope. With care and urgency, Mikhail and Boris lifted Xenia, her body rigid from the cold, a burden of love and concern. Yelena, with Anya in her arms, led the way back to the cabin, her eyes fixed on the matriarch. The sheep in the sheepfold watched in silence, understanding. The village, which Xenia had saved, now united to save her. A current of human connection, gratitude and love that defied Yakutia's merciless vastness. The fireplace crackled, but the heat seemed insufficient for Xenia's cold. They laid her on soft furs near the fire and rubbed her limbs to restore warmth. Anya, clinging to her mother, watched her grandmother with tear-filled eyes, innocence confronted by fragility. The matriarch, who had faced 1,000 leopards, now lay there, vulnerable, her life hanging by a thin thread. A flame the village strove to rekindle, even the strongest needed community to survive. The fireplace crackled, but the heat seemed insufficient for Xenia's cold. They laid her on soft furs near the fire and rubbed her limbs to restore warmth. Anya, clinging to her mother, watched her grandmother with tear-filled eyes. Innocence confronted by fragility. The matriarch, who had faced 1,000 leopards, now lay there, vulnerable, her life hanging by a thin thread. A flame the village strove to rekindle, even the strongest needed community to survive. Mikhail, with his large, calloused hands, massaged his mother's feet and legs, feeling the stiffness of the ice that still stubbornly clung to her. His eyes, normally firm and full of determination, were now clouded with apprehension. Yelena, in turn, prepared a hot herbal tea, an ancestral remedy against the cold, and with a small spoon tried to make Xenia drink, drop by drop. The matriarch did not react, her mouth slightly open, her breathing almost imperceptible. Within the darkness that enveloped her, Xenia felt a profound cold, an emptiness that seemed to suck her very essence, but somehow distant voices began to penetrate the fog. Soft sounds, gentle touches. She couldn't discern the words, but she felt the warmth, not the warmth of the fire, but the warmth of hands holding her, of presences surrounding her. A fleeting image of Anya, with her dark hair and bright eyes dancing in the snow, appeared in her mind. It was a vision of life, of hope, a beacon in the darkness. Xenia tried to cling to it, to fight against the temptation of eternal rest that the cold offered. Her muscles ached, every fiber of her body seemed to scream, but Anya's image was a balm, a reason to return. Little Anya, sitting beside her grandmother, watched her parents' every move. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she felt the gravity in the air, the tension on the adults' faces. With her eyes fixed on her grandmother, she reached out her small hand and touched Xenia's wrinkled face, so different from the warmth it always radiated. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice choked. A solitary tear ran down her cheek, falling onto the matriarch's cold skin. In that instant, Xenia trembled slightly, an almost imperceptible movement, but one that did not go unnoticed by Mikhail. He stopped massaging, his eyes fixed on his mother's face. Yelena also stopped, the teapot still in her hand. An expectant silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace. Boris, the hunter, who had remained silent, observing with his experience, approached and checked her pulse again. A faint smile appeared on his lips. "Stronger," he murmured, a thread of hope in his deep voice. "She's fighting." The news spread like a whisper among the neighbors who crowded at the door, waiting anxiously. A collective relief, a shared sigh filled the air. The entire community was there, not just physically, but in spirit, each one donating their energy and faith to the matriarch who had given so much for them. Xenia, the guardian of the village, was in turn being guarded. Slowly, Xenia opened her eyes. Her vision was blurred, the cabin ceiling spun, but she felt the warmth, the smell of smoke from the fireplace, and, above all, the gentle touch of Anya's hand on her face. A warmth spread from her chest. Not just physical warmth, but the warmth of love, of connection. She tried to smile, but her lips were stiff. A faint groan escaped her throat, the first word in hours. Mikhail and Yelena leaned in, their faces filled with renewed hope. The flame, though weak, was rekindling. The fight was not over yet, but Xenia, with the strength of her unbreakable spirit and the love of her community, had taken the first step back from the darkness. Winter was still long, but hope, like the rising sun, began to warm the village's soul. Xenia blinked again, her vision still blurry, but now shapes began to gain contour. Mikhail's face, serious and worried, hovered over her, followed by Yelena's, whose tear-filled eyes fixed on hers with palpable relief. And then Anya, her granddaughter's small hand still rested on her cheek, a touch that seemed to infuse warmth directly into her frozen heart. Xenia tried to move her lips, but her throat was dry and rough, and the sound that came out was just a faint groan, a whisper of her existence. Mikhail, noticing the effort, leaned closer. "Don't strain yourself, Mama. Rest." He held her hand, squeezing it gently, and Xenia felt her son's strength, an unshakable pillar of support. Yelena, with the still steaming teapot, carefully brought the spoon to the matriarch's lips. This time, Xenia managed to swallow a small amount of the warm liquid, feeling it go down her throat like a healing balm. The bitter taste of the herbs was familiar, a reminder of home, of healing, and of ancestral wisdom. Anya, with her large, curious eyes, watched her grandmother. She didn't speak, but her presence was a silent song of unconditional love. Xenia, with a tremendous effort that exhausted her last reserves, moved a finger slightly, trying to touch her granddaughter's soft, dark hair. Anya, understanding the gesture, tilted her head tenderly, allowing the fragile and almost imperceptible touch. In that instant, the matriarch felt the darkness recede a little more, like fog dissipating in the sun. Life, the life she had fought so fiercely to protect, was there, by her side, pulsating with hope. News of Ksenia's improvement spread quickly through the village, carried by whispers of relief and gratitude. Neighbors, who had waited anxiously outside, now entered the cabin in respectful silence, their faces marked by a mixture of contained concern and renewed hope. They brought extra fur blankets, carefully prepared dried meat, and even some hard-gathered frozen berries, offerings of affection, support, and solidarity. Boris, the experienced hunter, sat in a distant corner, observing Xenia with deep, silent respect. He knew exactly what she had done, the almost fatal sacrifice that had cost her life. Xenia's recovery would be slow and painful, an arduous path back to full consciousness. The cold had settled deep in her bones, and exhaustion was a heavy cloak that enveloped her, threatening to pull her back into the darkness. But she was not alone in her battle. With each vigorous massage from Mikhail, each sip of warm tea from Yelena, each gentle and loving touch from Anya, Xenia felt her strength return, a thin thread of life that grew stronger with each moment. She couldn't speak much, but her eyes, now clearer and more focused, conveyed her deep gratitude and the love she felt. Days followed, and Ksenia's cabin became the vital center of the village. Women came to cook nutritious soups, men to chop wood and ensure the fire never went out, children to play silently near the door, all contributing their skills and their hearts to the matriarch's well-being. They told stories of Xenia, of her legendary courage, of her ancestral wisdom, of how she had faced the 1,000 leopards and emerged victorious against all odds. Xenia listened, her lips curved in a faint smile, feeling the unmistakable warmth of the community that enveloped her with such affection. She thought of the sheep, safe in the sheepfold, and of the village that would continue to prosper thanks to her tireless struggle. That act of pure altruism in the depths of the icy night had forged an even stronger and indissoluble bond between her and her people. They were one, an extended family, united against the relentless vastness of Yakutia. Xenia, though still fragile in body, felt her spirit unbreakable, stronger than ever. She had saved everyone, and now they were saving her. The triumph was not just individual, but collective, a vibrant testament to the strength of human connection. Winter was still harsh, but the flame of hope, rekindled by love and gratitude, burned brighter than ever in the village's soul. The flame of hope, rekindled by love and gratitude, burned brighter than ever in the village's soul. But in Xenia's body, recovery was a slow and arduous process. Each day brought a small improvement, a faint sign that life was winning the battle against cold and exhaustion. She could now sit up, supported by fur pillows, observing the movement of the cabin with a more present, though still somewhat distant gaze. Her eyes, once clouded, regained the sparkle of wisdom, scanning the faces of her loved ones with silent gratitude. Mikhail and Yelena were tireless. He continued to massage his mother's limbs, feeling the gradual return of circulation, her previously cold skin now warming under his calloused hands. Yelena, with infinite patience, prepared nutritious broths and herbal teas, feeding Xenia with small spoonfuls, celebrating each swallowed sip as a great victory. Anya, little Anya, was the light of the cabin. She sat at her grandmother's feet, drawing in the melted snow with a stick or singing old songs Xenia had taught her. Her childish laughter, light and pure, was a balm for the matriarch's soul, a melody that chased away the darkness. Xenia, in turn, felt frustration grow within her. Her spirit was ready to rise, to resume her tasks, to care for her sheep, but her body, traitorous and heavy, refused to obey. Her fingers, once so agile with the staff, could barely hold a cup. She watched the blizzard through the window, imagining the sheep in the sheepfold, the village depending on them. A silent anguish invaded her. Would she now be a burden? The idea of depending on others, she who had always been everyone's pillar, was an emotional obstacle more difficult to overcome than the horde of leopards. One day, as Mikhail helped her stand for a brief walk around the cabin, Xenia stopped, her eyes fixed on the staff leaning against the wall. It was her companion, her symbol of strength. She extended her trembling hand, and Mikhail, understanding, handed it to her. The familiar weight in her hands brought a wave of emotion. She held it firmly, feeling the cold wood, but also the memory of her strength. A faint but determined smile curved her lips. "The sheep," she murmured, her voice hoarse but audible. Mikhail squeezed her hand. "They're fine, Mama. Boris and the others are taking care of them. They're safe." Xenia nodded, but the determination in her eyes was clear. She didn't just want them to be safe, she wanted to be there, with them. That small gesture, holding the staff, was an internal turning point. It wasn't just about surviving, but about reclaiming her purpose. The community had saved her body, but her spirit, unshakable, demanded more. She needed to rise again, not just for herself, but for the village, to prove that YAKUT resilience knew no limits of age or fragility. The path would be long, but Xenia, with her staff in hand and her family's love as her guide, was ready for every step. Xenia, staff in hand, felt the weight of the wood as an extension of herself, but also as a cruel reminder of her fragility. The path to recovery was long, and each step inside the cabin was a testament to her will. Mikhail watched her, ready to support her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and concern. Yelena, with Anya in her arms, offered an encouraging smile, but Ksenia saw the veiled apprehension on their faces. She tried to move, dragging her feet, every muscle protesting, a dull ache that refused to leave. The matriarch felt frustration bubbling up. Her body, once an instrument of strength and resilience, now seemed a stranger, slow and disobedient. She remembered her youth, the winters spent on the tundra, the agility with which she herded the flock, the ease with which she faced the harsh weather. Now, the simple task of crossing the cabin seemed like climbing a mountain. I need the sheep," she murmured, her voice still hoarse, but with increasing intensity. The idea of being a burden, of no longer being able to protect her people, was a torment greater than any cold. Mikhail, with his unshakable patience, helped her sit, drink the warm tea, and massaged her limbs. "Gently, Mama. You're getting better every day," he said, his voice a balm. Anya, sensing her grandmother's anguish, brought her small objects, river-polished stones, raven feathers, as if to infuse her with the beauty and strength of nature. Ksenia squeezed her granddaughter's hands, feeling life pulsating there, a reason to fight. The community continued to visit her, bringing news from the sheepfold, assuring her that the sheep were well, but Ksenia felt something was missing. One morning, the sun shone with a rare intensity, and Ksenia, looking out the window, saw the sparkling snow. The sheep. They called to her. A firm decision formed in her heart. She needed to go to them, not just to see them, but to feel the icy ground beneath her feet, the wind on her face, to reaffirm her place in the world. "I'm going to the sheepfold," she declared, her voice stronger than in previous days, but still with a tone of defiance. Mikhail and Yelena exchanged glances. Concern was evident, but the determination in Ksenia's eyes was undeniable. With Mikhail's help on one side and Yelena's on the other, Ksenia stood up. Every movement was agony, but she refused to yield. The staff, now a vital support, tapped on the wooden floor with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The door opened, and Yakutia's icy air enveloped her, a familiar bite that this time felt invigorating. She took a deep breath, feeling the pure, biting air fill her lungs. The snow crunched under her boots, a sound she had missed. Anya, wrapped in furs, held Yelena's hand, her eyes fixed on her grandmother, a mixture of fear and admiration. The journey to the sheepfold, which once took only a few minutes, now seemed like an expedition. Ksenia leaned heavily on her staff, her steps dragging but firm. With each meter, strength seemed to return, not to her body, but to her spirit. The entire village watched in respectful silence, a silent procession of support and hope. When she finally reached the sheepfold, Ksenia released Mikhail's and Yelena's hands. The sheep, sensing her presence, raised their heads, bleating softly. Ksenia extended her trembling hand, touching the soft wool of one of them. A true smile of pure joy and relief illuminated her wrinkled face. She was there, she had returned. The matriarch's unbreakable spirit, forged in ice and adversity, reaffirmed itself not only for herself, but for the entire village. The connection was palpable. An unbreakable bond between the guardian, her flock, and her people, always strong and alive. The connection was palpable. An unbreakable bond between the guardian, her flock, and her people, always strong and alive. In that moment in the sheepfold, Ksenia felt a profound peace, a serenity that filled every fiber of her being. It was not the peace of rest, but the peace of renewed purpose, of a battle won against predators and her own fragility. Her eyes swept over the sheep, silent witnesses to her courage, and then fixed on the faces of Mikhail, Yelena, and Anya, who watched her with admiration and unconditional love. Mikhail knelt beside her, his eyes moist with emotion. "You did it, Mama. You came back to us." His voice was choked, and he held her hand gently. Yelena, with Anya nestled in her arms, also approached, and little Anya reached out to touch her grandmother's wrinkled face, a gesture of pure affection. Xenia smiled, a smile that reached her eyes, showing that the flame in her spirit had not only rekindled, but now burned with greater intensity. The neighbors, who had accompanied the journey in silence, now approached, their faces lit by smiles of relief and respect. Boris, the hunter, gave a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the matriarch. There was no need for words. Xenia's presence there, standing, even if supported, among her sheep was the greatest declaration. She was no longer a burden. She was the embodiment of resilience, living proof that the YAKUT spirit, forged in ice, was indomitable. From that day on, Xenia's recovery, though gradual, gained new rhythm and meaning. She could no longer run across the tundra, nor carry heavy burdens, but her mind was as sharp as ever, and her wisdom more valuable than ever. She spent hours in the sheepfold, sitting on a fir bench, observing the sheep, teaching Anya about the signs of nature, about how to care for animals, about the importance of every life in the community. Mikhail and Yelena listened attentively, absorbing every lesson. The village, in turn, flourished under the aura of its matriarch, inspired by her strength. The story of Xenia and the 1,000 leopards became a living legend, told and retold around the fireplaces, inspiring everyone to face their own challenges with courage and altruism. The sheep, saved from certain death, prospered, ensuring food and warmth for the winter that still stretched ahead. Human connection, once an abstract concept, was now a tangible force that united every member of the community. Xenia, though she felt the marks of age and ordeal on her body, knew she had fulfilled her greater purpose. She had not only saved the sheep, but reaffirmed the unbreakable spirit of her people. The resolution of her internal conflicts came with the acceptance of her new way of leading, no longer by physical strength, but by deep wisdom, constant presence, and unwavering love. She was the guardian, the flame that would never go out, and her village, her precious legacy, was safe. Winter was still merciless, but hope now was a bonfire lit in everyone's heart. Winter was still merciless, but hope now was a bonfire lit in everyone's heart. The days lengthened, slowly, and the snow continued to cover the landscape with its white, glistening mantle, but Xenia's cabin radiated a different warmth, a warmth that came not only from the crackling fireplace, but from the resilient soul of its inhabitants. Xenia, sitting on her fir bench with her staff, her old companion leaning beside her, watched Anya play with snow figures Mikhail had carved for her. Her eyes, once filled with pain and the weariness of the ordeal, now shone with a profound serenity and ancestral wisdom. She could no longer herd the sheep under the icy sun, nor feel the biting wind on her face as she traversed the tundra with the same agility as before, but her presence was an unshakable beacon, an anchor for the entire village. Mikhail, stronger and more mature than ever, had taken on much of the flock's responsibilities, but every important decision was discussed with his mother. He knelt beside her, listening attentively, valuing her wisdom, the experience of almost a century of life in Yakutia. Xenia, in turn, felt immense pride seeing her son's dedication and love for the land and its people, a legacy she had cultivated. Yelena, with her sweetness and silent strength, cared for the home and little Anya, ensuring the matriarch had all the necessary comfort and nourishment, her gestures always gentle and full of affection. The cabin was always filled with childish laughter, whispered stories, and the comforting aroma of warm soups. Anya, growing every day, was Xenia's greatest joy. Her granddaughter sat at her feet, her head resting on her grandmother's knee, listening to stories about the wild tundra, about the animals that inhabited it, about the importance of respecting nature and caring for one another. Ksenia, with her soft, hoarse voice, narrated the epic of the 1,000 leopards, not as a tale of terror, but as a living lesson in courage, altruism, and the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. Anya absorbed every word, her large dark eyes reflecting deep admiration and love for her grandmother. She already knew that one day she would be the guardian of these stories, the bearer of the flame of YAKUT resilience. The entire village felt the change. Ksenia's story was not just a distant memory, but a constant guide. People helped each other more, shared their resources more generously, and faith in the community had solidified into an unbreakable bond. When spring finally arrived, bringing with it the thaw and the first signs of new life, the village celebrated not only the end of the harsh winter, but the renewal of its own collective spirit. The sheep, fat and healthy, grazed in the fields emerging from the snow, a living and vibrant symbol of Ksenia's victory. Ksenia, now 98 years old, felt life pulsating around her with renewed intensity. She had faced death and returned, not to be the same, but to be even more, an eternal source of inspiration. Her body was fragile, but her spirit was a mountain, unshakable and eternal. She had ensured that the flame of hope and life continued to burn in Yakutia, brighter than ever. On a sunny afternoon, Ksenia sat at the door of her cabin, the warm sun on her wrinkled face, a serene smile on her lips. Anya was by her side, holding her hand firmly, her little eyes fixed on the horizon. Ksenia closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun, the loving touch of her granddaughter, the distant and reassuring sound of the sheep bleating. She had fulfilled her mission, and life in Yakutia would continue, forged in ice but warmed by love and human connection. And the Yakut spirit of altruism and determination transcended death itself, living in every soul she touched. A legacy forever. Ksenia closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun, the loving touch of her granddaughter, the distant and reassuring sound of the sheep bleating. She had fulfilled her mission, and life in Yakutia would continue, forged in ice but warmed by love and human connection. And the Yakut spirit of altruism and determination transcended death itself, living in every soul she touched, a legacy forever. Anya, feeling her grandmother's hand subtly relax, looked up. Ksenia's eyes were closed and a smile of profound peace adorned her wrinkled lips. It was not ordinary sleep, but a serenity that seemed to envelop the tundra itself. The little girl squeezed her grandmother's hand more tightly, as if wanting to retain that warmth, that presence that was the pillar of her world. A gentle wind blew, bringing the scent of melting snow and the murmur of waters beginning to flow. Anya felt a cold breeze, but at the same time an unmistakable warmth that came from within, from her grandmother's heart, spreading through her. Mikhail and Yelena, who had been watching the scene closely, approached in silence. Mikhail knelt, touching his mother's shoulder with reverence. His eyes, previously filled with concern, now reflected a serene understanding. Ksenia was no longer there in body, but her essence, her strength, her love, had merged with the very land she had loved and protected so much. Yelena, with silent tears streaming down her face, hugged Anya, who, though small, understood the grandeur of the moment. Grandma was not gone. She had become part of Yakutia, a guiding star in the icy sky, a whisper in the wind that blew over the tundra. The news spread through the village, not with sadness, but with solemn reverence. Ksenia had lived a full life, defied the impossible, and left a legacy that would echo for generations. Neighbors came, not to mourn, but to celebrate. They gathered around the cabin, sharing stories of her courage, of her wisdom, of how she had faced 1,000 leopards and saved everyone. Each word was a thread weaving the tapestry of her memory, keeping her alive and present. Anya, in her father's arms, listened to every tale, her large eyes absorbing the light of the fireplace and the sparkle of the stars. She was the heir to the flame, the guardian of the stories. Xenia had taught her to read the signs of nature, to listen to the heart of animals, to understand the silent strength of the community. And now, Anya felt the responsibility, but also the joy of carrying that knowledge. She knew that her grandmother would always be with her, in every snowflake, in every bleat of the sheep, in every ray of sun that broke through winter. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Spring bloomed, summer brought abundance, and autumn painted the tundra with vibrant colors before winter returned. Relentless as ever, but Xenia's village was no longer the same. The seed of altruism and human connection she had planted had germinated, transforming into a forest of mutual support and unshakable resilience. Mikhail led with his mother's wisdom. Yelena cared for the home and community with the same gentleness and strength, and Anya, growing every day, was the promise of the future, her eyes reflecting the same determination and love that Ksenia had possessed. The sheep, now more numerous and healthier than ever, grazed in the fields, a living symbol of the victory of a matriarch who refused to yield. The story of Ksenia and the 1,000 leopards was not just a legend, but the very soul of the village, a constant reminder that even in the merciless vastness of Yakutia, the human spirit, forged in ice and warmed by love, was the most powerful force of all. Xenia had transcended death, living not only in memories, but in the very fiber of her people, an eternal legacy of courage and hope.